Is it better to buy or to rent? I'm going to compare two similar homes in the same neighborhood, run the numbers, and show you how you can retire with an extra $11 million dollars if you're smart about it. Since this channel is for people who actually want to make money, we're not going to compare two rinky-dink houses like people normally do when they do this. The town I chose for this comparison is a very nice northeastern town within commuting distance to New York City, Westport, Connecticut. We have two houses here in the same town that are relatively similar. So the question is, over a 30-year period, would you be better off buying or renting? This is house one, the house would be buying. And this is house two here, the house would be renting. I tried to be pretty unbiased here and choose houses that actually the rental is nicer than the one you'd be buying here. Overall, I really didn't cherry pick though. I mean, you could look in on Zillow feed here, and there's tons of opportunities to rent at similar lower prices. Some higher, obviously, it can be very high on market, obviously going up to 60,000 a month. But there are a lot you can find in like a pretty reasonable range here that you can rent. So I mean, there really wasn't any cherry picking at all here. This one's 3,000 a month, 5 beds, 3.5 baths, right? There's a lot you can do around that $7,000 a month figure. Here's another one pretty similar. And I think there were a few more. Here's another perfect example. Another one here. So there's a lot there. Same thing on the sale side. I really didn't cherry pick. I mean, you could see right here, another one, 3,000 square feet, 1.7 mil. Honestly, in this market, you can get ones way more expensive, right? Going up to pick a number, there are probably some $20 million houses on here. So I really didn't cherry pick at all. $1.7 million house and a $6,500 a month rental are kind of par for the course here. I chose a slightly larger house, I guess you would say around 3,000 square feet, but I think that's reasonable, something you want to live in. And just tried to give you pretty good representation here. Obviously, it's never going to be exactly apples to apples, but I think overall you're in the million to 3 million range buying a house, and you're probably somewhere in the 5 to 10K range renting. It's not going to change the numbers that much overall. All right, I want to show you guys the math behind this now. And as you can see here, we have three tabs. One's buy, so this is basically the cost of buying on this tab. This next tab is the cost of renting. And then we have a summary tab, which I'll get to in a bit. So on the buying tab, it's pretty simple. We have the years across here. Goes across 30 years because of the 30-year mortgage. We have the price itself of 1.7, the down payment, which is 20% of that. Then property taxes, which are calculated at 70% of the purchase price times 1.84%. I actually think they might end up being higher than that. Insurance, 10 grand, given the age, a lot of these houses could easily be higher than that as well. Maintenance was at 1% of the house value. Once again, given the age, I think that might be a bit of a low ball. And insurance, utilities are $750 a month times 12 months based on just quotes I saw online. So total upkeep year one is around 58 grand here. I then grew that at 3% because obviously these are going to grow over time for the 30-year loan. The debt terms, I just took the kind of average rate in America right now, which is around 6%. Amortization, 30 years. And the loan amount is just the remaining amount that was not on the down payment. So 1.359. All right, so you're going to be paying principal and interest on that. That's roughly comes out to $99,000 a year in principal and interest. And that kind of stays consistent the entire time. Obviously, it's typical debt schedule in that the principal goes up over time that you pay and the interest goes down. But the total debt service payment will remain the same. So your total yearly cost every single year between the upkeep and the debt service is around 157 grand to start out. And obviously that grows over time because the upkeep is growing over time. I assume, to be generous, really, that the home value increases 3% a year. And then at the end of the 30 years, you obviously own the entire home, right? You've paid off the entire principal balance and you own the entire home. So this $1.7 million home, I'm assuming becomes $4 million after 30 years, which I think is a generous assumption given where asset values are right now, but that's what I assumed. In the meantime, obviously, you're paying this amount per year to upkeep the house. And that's going to become important in a second when we get to the rent tab. All right, so here's the rental tab. This is just the basic cost of renting it. Pretty similar here, the rental costs. As we saw, this rental is $6,500 a year. I assume you're paying for utilities as well, and I assume those utilities are the same exact cost as they were for the other house, so 9 grand. So your total cost here is going to be $87,000 on year one, And that's going to increase over time, same 3% growth rate that we assumed for the other house that we bought. So pretty simple there. What we are going to assume, though, is that you're able to take that money you didn't spend on the down payment and invest that, right? So that's what this line is right here. And we're assuming that you're getting an average 10% return in the S&P. Personally, I think if you're investing in real estate assets, so like the stuff I do, right, real estate private equity, you should be clearing that by a wide margin. But I'm just going to assume you're passively investing in the S&P and you're getting a very standard 10% return. So pretty run-of-the-mill assumption there. And we're going to judge that over the 30-year period as well. So we have, just to recap, right, we have the rental cost, which is increasing every year over 30 years. And right now we're just saying you're investing the down payment. So this down payment is growing at 10% per year, assuming you just put in the S&P. Then we basically have the delta, right? Remember from the other tab, the cost of home ownership is around 157,000 a year. The cost of renting is only 87,000. So you actually have 70 grand right now for the first year. It changes every year. But you have 70 grand for that first year that you could also invest into the S&P 500 and get a 10% return. So that's what I'm showing down here. And you can see each year it's a different amount you're investing, but you're able to grow this delta every year. And it's really significant, right? Just because the cost of owning a home is so much, it's so high that you end up spending so much more than you would as a renter. So basically, if you take year one, right, or just the 70 grand from year one, over the course of 30 years, that turns to 1.1 million. If you take the amount from year two, that turns into 990K, right? And so on and so forth. So that's what's happening there, just taking the delta that you would have spent on home ownership and saying, instead of that, you're going to invest that in the S&P 500. That's all we're doing there. So you can see over the course of this time frame, you have the amount you invested into the S&P 500 just based off the down payment, and that turns into $5.4 million. Then you have all of this down here, right? Assuming every year you invest the delta, and that turns into almost $10 million. So if you look at the summary tab, basically buying over the course of that period, you assume that the home grows 3% a year, you end up with $4 million after spending everything you spend every year. If you rent it instead, and you combine the invested down payment of, I forgot what it was, just over 300K, I believe. Yeah, 340K. That's the invested down payment over 30 years at 10%. And then the difference between the rental cost and the home ownership that you have that money, you just invest in the S&P instead of spending it on the maintenance of your home. That becomes almost $10 million. So in all, you end up with $15 million renting versus $4 million buying. It's a huge difference, right? So over the course of 30 years, you get $11 million more by renting versus buying. This is really a massive difference. And I think I want to be clear about this. It's not small, right? Assuming you typically buy your house between the ages of 30 and 35, the 30-year mortgage basically ends around retirement age. So this legitimately could be your retirement plan. You could say, instead of buying a house, I'm going to rent for 30 years, and you would end up with $11 million. And obviously this is a higher end house, right? But the whole point of this channel is for people who want to make money. So $1.7 million house is really not crazy. A common response to this is going to be, what happens if rates drop and you can refinance, right? Wouldn't that change the numbers? And sure, it would change the numbers, but a few things here. One is you actually come out ahead just investing the down payment itself versus buying. So even without all this extra delta here, you still come out ahead. The second is, even if you drop the rate to 3.5% for the full period, so let's just come over here, make this 3.5%, and let's see how that changes everything, you still end up with $7 million more, right? It's a huge number. You still end up with $7 million more, even if you refinance, just because of where asset prices are right now. So the real problem isn't actually the rate, it's how inflated asset prices are. So I guess the next question is, how much does asset prices need to drop, right, in order for this to work, in order for these to equalize the cost of buying and renting for over 30 years? And in reality, I mean, let's see what we got here. We want to turn this to zero. Let's turn it to zero. Change this. The house would need to be under $1 million. So it just goes to show you how crazily inflated assets are right now. You basically need this house to drop, what, over 40% for the numbers to even out and for the advantage of renting to be erased. And look, you can argue that there's a premium for owning your home, and I agree with that. You should be able to be willing to lose some amount of money over 30 years to own your own place. But maybe that's like $1 million, $2 or $3 million you'd be willing to lose over that time frame. I don't think it's anywhere near $11 million or $7 million. So it's really a crazy number. I think in today's economy, it can be tempting to say that kind of fall into the narrative, right? That black-owned, black restart. I think in today's economy, it can be tempting to fall into the narrative that private equity, Blackstone, BlackRock, whatever you want to call it, they're buying up all the assets and they're making it impossible to buy a house. And I think to some degree it's true, right? Asset prices have inflated. I don't think it's because of that, but I think they're extremely inflated right now. And as we saw with the math here, they're inflated by roughly $11 million, right? Well, it's inflated by 40%, which results in you making another $11 million if you decide to invest in the S&P 500 versus putting that into a house. So I think you can use the fact that assets are inflated to your advantage right now and just choose to rent instead of buy and just basically clip the spread. And there's obviously a huge spread. Really, the only reason why people want to buy is mainly ego, right? You want to tell people you own a house. Obviously, you want to make changes to the house and things like that, but really you want to tell people you own a house. And if you rent, you really just come out way on top. The last thing I want to point out here is obviously we have this $11 million delta here. That's being driven by this investment return of 10%, which is kind of just the S&P long-term average. It's really sensitive to the return here. So if you make this 11%, you actually make another $4 million. So there's a huge, huge alpha in being able to generate your own returns outside of the S&P 500. And that's what I do personally. It's also what I teach in the Acquisitions Bootcamp. Basically a program that shows you how to make money in real estate starting from zero and just scale up a portfolio, which is what I did. I went from 200K property, that was 3 units, up to 60 million AUM now. So it's something I know very well. I have obviously vastly exceeded 10% return during that time frame. And I teach people how to do that as well. And I would say most of my students, I can't say all, probably, I can't guarantee it, but a wide majority of my students who go through the program, they vastly exceed that as well. You can see that in the testimonials and all the case studies. So if you'd like to sign up for that program or apply for it, you could do that in the link below the video.